Hey, what is up? This is Jake Hofer. You may have caught on that the last few intros have been recorded at the same spot at the same time, but that doesn't matter right now. This episode is all about scrapes and how you can create mock scrapes to help define deer movement. We talk with the Last Breath guys, Garret and Grant, all about it. They've had really good success over the years using this strategy, so we hope you guys enjoy it. You guys are able to implement it right now, right away. If you guys enjoy it, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Now let's go ahead and get into the full interview.
Lights,
camera,
follow the trail.
ready to shoot.
If you know where a deer's bedding and you know where he's eating, that deer should be dead.
Camera.
If you're passive on a deer, what you're doing is you're teaching them.
I've got 30 bucks in the Michigan record book. Everyone but one has had at least one previous wound on his body. Some had as many as 4.
Trail Cam Radio from the guys at Exodus.
All right, we're live with a fresh episode of Trail Cam Radio, and this is my favorite series. This is the Scrape Week series. We've been talking to folks this throughout the year, and we always want to release a lot of really good, relevant conversations to right now, which is basically late October, October 20th, depends on when this goes live. So we hope your guys' season is going well. But we have Grant and Garret here from Last Breath, and we released the previous interview kind of talking about a series they have, Image Autopsy, and also how they found success over the years using trail cameras. And in that conversation, if there was a word counter for scrape, it would have been the highest word, I think, if I was a betting man.
Yeah.
So now we're talking all about scrapes, how you guys are making mock scrapes, where are you putting them, why, and just all about it. So do you guys need to get reintroduced, or do you think they listened to the last one?
In case you didn't, this is Garret.
And I'm Grant.
So now we got that out of the way.
Perfect.
I'm
This is
thinking
what we sound like.
for this to go, I'll do how we build it, and then you talk about the different ones.
Yep.
So I think we actually reverse that. Talk about the 3 different scrapes that we recognize as our little menu of scrapes.
You want me to dive right into that right now?
Well, I'll just say that probably correlates to how organized and precise they are with many other things, just that little mini conversation. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
We're
some
both
people
type A.
that are very,
We're type A as hell. We talk about that all the time. We think that we personally would have lived much better lives if we weren't intense about a lot of things and just, blissfully ignorant, stupid people that just didn't give a shit about a whole lot. But I don't know. It's like a curse. Like the other day, we were building the wagon blind. We bought a running gear so we could have a mobile blind so we could get up above an elevation in a place that we can hunt for shotgun season coming up in Illinois. And Garret was like, "Well, how much do you think it would cost to build this thing tricked out the whole way we want it with the car lap siding and with these double pane insulated windows? We could spray foam insulation. We got a good R factor in our roof. We'll shingle the roof and it'll be completely scent free and tight." Because we've cranked out a couple blinds just like that, homemade, just because we have a couple carpentry skills. But that was about 10 days before deer season. And I was like, we're going to stick with the plan. We're going to put this little pop-up blind on it. It'll be fine. But it eats at us, like shit like that. So I can't say that we're super type A. But
So hit them with a 3 types.
All right, so the scrapes. The 3 that we recognize are the first one being a community scrape. This is a scrape that a deer uses, all deer use. This could be anything from a forkhorn, a doe, a yearling buck, all the way up to a dominant mature buck or the biggest, fattest doe that you can think of. And this is a communication hub. This is where a deer could potentially go in the rut to say, oh, a doe's hot. She peed in here. Okay, this is the beacon. Now I'm going to follow the bread trail, and I'm going to go try to find her, essentially. Or it could just be saying, hey, I'm here. That's a community scrape, and those are scrapes that you find in the woods, on field edges, near bedding areas that are massive. So community scrape will be one that's just so shredded that you'll walk by it and be like, wow, this thing looks like it's a manhole cover on the street or bigger. It's extremely large. It could be as big as 3-4 feet in diameter. Completely massive, and you'll hang a camera over that, which we do, and you'll get all manner of types of deer on it. And that's typically a place that's like central to one dominant bucks. We don't find a ton of different dominant bucks using a community scrape, but we'll find different community scrapes within separate dominant bucks areas that are using that with his harem of does and, just like a dominant like herd bull elk would, quote unquote. And then that's just every deer uses it. And then the second part that we recognize is a territory scrape. These are smaller scrapes, like 1-2 feet in diameter, that are made by a specific buck that's trying to carve out his core area.
Like a field edge?
Like a field edge, like a ridge top, like an encircled bedding area in which he's putting scrapes in the ground to say, hey, this is my turf. Don't cross this boundary or we're going to have problems, essentially. So that's a territory scrape. And then the other one is called a dominant scrape, which I think is a term that we made up, that we've just been calling that scrape for about 6 or 8 years. And a dominant scrape is, let's say that you rattle in a buck. He can't see anything because maybe you're not using a decoy or whatever, but he'll posture up and he'll start raking the ground, which most of the time in this scrape week we're talking about, lots of leaves are on the ground, so he's kicking up leaves, and it'll be a small scrape that's maybe not necessarily under a tree even. So most scrapes that we find, at least a territory scrape, the deer will put their face, nose on the licking branch and they'll jostle the tree around, etc. But these little dominant scrapes could be simply two bucks that see each other that say, I'm big and bad, and they rake the leaves or kind of try to intimidate the other buck without physically going and bashing heads. So those would be small scrapes that you'd be like, what the heck? Was this a turkey scratching? Like, it's almost like, it's almost unrecognizable. Some people will be like, why is there a scrape right here? Like, there's not a lot of trees around. This is in the middle of an open field. This is in the middle of a timber. This is kind of off the beaten path. Why does this exist? And maybe it's just simply a deer that's trying to show his dominance. And that's just kind of like a rut sign that we look for while we're kind of combing through the woods. So 3 types: community, territory, dominant scrape.
Quick question for the dominant scrape. If you guys come across that randomly, are you getting excited because, well, this could be a dominant buck, or is it more just another piece of the puzzle?
I think they can be very confusing because, just like Grant said, more times than not you'll see them happen than you'll stumble upon them.
Right.
Like, everybody's probably been sitting and you see like a couple 2-year-olds or a 2 and a 3-year-old come to the field, and one of them's, they're not quite ready to fight yet. One of them's still kind of happy-go-lucky, but the other one's like, hey, I'm big, I'm bad. And he walks over to the nearest low-hanging branch and he beats it up, and all he's doing is just puffing his chest. It can be very confusing for hunters because you like stumble across, you're like, oh, it started. Well, realistically, the ground hasn't been worked that much. The buck probably did not deposit scent into it. He was just literally flexing. So I don't get too excited about him. Like when Grant was talking about territory scrapes, those are the ones that are pronounced, that you can tell a deer spent time, he's invested time in. And he's, even if they're just the size of like a dinner plate, that's going to be quite a bit bigger than like a dominant scrape. Because I think for a deer to remove the grass, to get the dirt exposed, to break off a couple branches, I mean, he's working it, and he's probably doing it multiple times.
He's there for a while for a purpose, and like we said, usually those territory scrapes, they're in a line. Like when people talk about a scrape line and hunting a scrape line, that's what we believe that they are, is a deer carving out their core home areas, saying, here's the boundary, don't cross it. And that's when a lot of success can happen when hunting over a scrape line. But dominant scrape is kind of just a visual cue that the rut's happening for us. Okay. It's like, something could happen like October, 22nd, 25th time, where you start finding these little scrapes in weird places. It's like, okay, there was a deer that was pissed off in here a little bit, that was trying to flex, like Garrett said. So we don't put a whole lot of stock into them. We just recognize that as a third type because we've watched it happen so often.
Right. It's kind of like a good analogy here is when you take your dog on a walk. All the dogs pee on the one fire hydrant, right? All the dogs do. They always do. It's like part of their routine. That's the community scrape. They're extremely valuable. But the territory scrape is when your dog goes around his yard and pees on all the fence posts because it's his home, So that's a good way to kind of think of the difference of the two. All the dogs go sniff the fire hydrant, but they don't all come to the backyard. And when they do, they note, okay,
another dog lives in here.
Yes.
Okay, that's a good way to break that down. So those are the 3 types of scrapes, and then there's one I assume called the mock scrape for you guys as well. That
so we'll talk about the construction of it.
First off, where are you putting these mock scrapes? I think
I'm going to get into that.
Okay.
Yeah, so
I figure so.
Our construction involves like from the type of tree to where it's at. It is a thorough process, and what we try to duplicate is the territory scrape. So our mock scrapes, it's very hard to duplicate a community scrape just because of the frequency of animals that are there, the diversity of scents that you have in there. when you go to create a mock scrape, at best, maybe you have 2, maybe 3 scents that you're putting on the ground. That's if you're very, you go and you buy a couple different types of scents. But for us, we just rely on one scent that we put in the ground and on the licking branches. But before that even starts, you have to find the proper spot for it. And there's a couple different ways that we analyze where the location of a mock scrape goes. First is, was there a scrape there last year?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and you can read, even if it's a new farm, you can read if there was one there. Typically, you'll have low grass and foliage. Like sometimes it's even still bare after a full year.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be barren. Oftentimes the licking branches, if you will be broken. I mean, you can just tell that already. So if there was a scrape there last year, automatically okay, the location is in a good spot. It's high traffic. The branches and the tree are doing something. They're the right height, and the tree was a good tree because it was used already before. So it's checking boxes that you don't even have to realize. So that's sometimes a great spot to start a mock scrape. We're just trying to beat the deer there, because now we're already putting it in, and they're going to hit it earlier and sooner, and hopefully with more frequency rather than waiting for a deer to do it. So there's the one spot. But let's say you're on a farm and you want to create a brand new mock scrape. We really enjoy inside corners. We think that they generate a lot of traffic. Deer will hug timber lines quite a bit, and typically, I mean, if you think about where your field entrances and exits are, I bet you that a majority of them, or at least over half of them, are in the corners of fields. And it's just typically it's because there's old fence rows there, or because the farmer stopped because of a topography change, like farmers farm flat areas. So that's a good location. When you're looking for your tree, a lot of guys, I think, hang them a little higher than they need to. A deer stands lower head height than we do by quite a bit. So when we are looking for a proper licking branch height, we're really looking for like that low shoulder, that sternum area where you're working in front of you, not above you on the licking branches. When a deer approaches that scrape, he doesn't want to have to get on his hind legs. He doesn't really want to have to stick his head way up high to get his head in the scent, to apply his interdigital gland, his orbital gland. He doesn't want to have to really get up on his haunches. So you figured out that the height is relatively low, and then it goes to even the tree type. So a couple trees that we always avoid. There's 3 trees that we avoid, and that's hedge, that is locust, and that is walnut. So hedge and locust trees have thorns. Like if you were going to be shoving your head in a bush, you don't want it to be thorny, right? So we automatically put those to the wayside. And walnut is another one because walnut is very pungent. If you ever have picked up a walnut, or if you take walnut leaves and just rub them in your hand, it's extremely, extremely smelly. And so we find that deer don't want to have to compete with that because they're just putting a little bit of scent from their antlers and their face on there. And if you have a really, really aromatic tree like a walnut, it's going to mix and mince that scent up. So trees that we do like are mulberry trees, hackberry trees, and our favorite, without a doubt, are white oak. White oak is a great tree for this because the branches are extremely malleable. They're not brittle, so they can withstand a beating, and they bend, they don't break, and their leaves stay on forever. I mean, if you prune a white oak branch off and put it onto a mock scrape, I mean, you'll have those leaves stay on for months, I would say. So after we've picked out the tree, we identify corners are a good spot, or it's a location that we knew a scrape was at already. We recognize that it's a branch height that's accurate. It's a tree that we know deer are going to like to lick on and scrape on. Now we talk about the area underneath of it. You can start these as early as you want. We usually do it no earlier than Labor Day, and typically it's the second or third weekend after Labor Day is when we install our mock scrapes. But we're just, if we haven't already, you want to make sure and remove and trim the foliage as short as you can. So preemptively thinking about this in June or July, we'll go in and weed whack and sometimes even kill off a small plot, like with a backpack sprayer, just so that is bare dirt by the time we apply, and there's been plenty of time for the herbicide to wash out. So you've trimmed it down. We take a garden rake and we'll expose the earth about the size of a dinner plate, maybe a dinner platter at the most. We'll make sure and keep it relatively level. We don't want to make a bowl or a pocket. We'll take any of the foliage that we raked out of it, and we'll get it clear and far away so it doesn't enter the scrape again. We'll apply our scent to the scrape itself, and then we'll work the licking branches with another scent that we put on there, and we'll leave it be. And
so I guess let's say for someone on a farm that maybe there's not a lot of this scrape sign right now.
Yep.
What would you say to someone that's like, whoa, this all sounds great and dandy, but there's not necessarily a scrape line, or I'm not really sure to put a mock scrape. I understand inside corners, but are you trying to put it close to doe bedding, or where there's consistently daily deer traffic of, your doe family going to a destination food source, or what does that look like?
It's a great answer, or a great question. I think you always want to put a scrape where it's going to be high traffic. That's why we kind of like relied on these corners. But you're saying you're talking about a guy that doesn't have a buck on camera yet, or a lot of bucks on camera yet. You definitely want to have it in an area that they will be. So if you do have does, I bet you'll have does come in and investigate it. Sometimes we'll even lick and work on it.
Mm-hmm.
But we install them in the timber as well. Timber scrapes can be really effective, but again, it's a little bit harder because fields are just automatically destinations for deer. But if you know where your deer are bedding, I would try to put it in conjunction with bedding on the edge of a bedding area, or in between a bedding area and their food.
So on one episode, or the last recording, there was a mock scrape on the west side of where a buck was bedded.
Mm-hmm.
Was that strategic to have, in terms of setting up this mock scrape for a particular buck to hit it? And then, were you thinking of, we're putting this mock scrape here because we want to hunt this tree on this wind and we think he is there? What are some key takeaways there?
100%. So when we put in a mock scrape, we are constantly thinking about what tree options do we have here. Like we rarely put mock scrapes in places that we can't hang and hunt. So if you've got like a timber that's full of a bunch of like low-lying trees, like hedge that are hard to hang a stand in, etc., and you can't get but 2 or 3 feet off the ground before you're running into limbs, we do not put mock scrapes in areas like those. We put them where we always have an option or 2 options for trees. And what we try to do is we try to forecast and look ahead in the weather pattern. So Garrett and I, you can look ahead 10 days, and I have a wind journal that I break down and that I write in, and then we can go back through and look at old trail camera pictures and see, okay, this deer is walking on wind X. We're going to go and try to set up for this wind, given then that's what he's traveling on. But to answer your question, when we install a mock scrape, we always have a tree or 2 in mind that we could hop in, and we want it to be on a wind that's smart. What I mean by a wind that's smart is we do not set many stands up for east winds because they are rare. Most of our stands are hung up for a northwest wind. So we want our scrape, where we're going to kill that deer, it had better be southeast of our position, and we kill them when they get our wind in the scrape, and we have a shot when they're in our wind or cutting our wind in that mock scrape working, or they're upwind of us to a certain degree. And so we found a lot of luck looking forward in the weather forecast, putting a challenge scrape in like near. And when I say near, I mean if you've got a deer that's using like a 2 or 3 acre area and he's using it hard, we'll try to put one on the fringe of that area that we can get away with for that particular wind. For example, just a couple weeks ago, we found a mock scrape or a natural scrape. We put a challenge scrape next to it to entice the deer, like, who's messing with my territory? And we know that in that particular instance, over that natural scrape, that we're going to need to be able to hunt that on a south wind. So those October days, that are, we're going to get lots of south wind in October because there will be warm fronts in October still. Even in November, there will be days then it's 55 or possibly 60 during the rut. Nobody likes those days. Nobody wants that to happen, but we're prepared for that to happen because at the end of the day, if we have like 5 or 6 options and 5 or 6 deer hitting a scrape, we'll go to the one where we have the best chance, the most consistency, and we can get away with it hunting the wind at that location. So we're always taking the wind and the tree that we're hanging into consideration when we're putting one in.
Got it. So as you guys are hanging some of these mock scrapes in timber, I think in farm country, like you said, field edges, inside corners, those are, I think naturally people would do that even without realizing it, kind of like you made mention to. So let's say even a 40-acre block of woods, where or how are you hanging these? Are you hanging them on top of a saddle or making these on top of a saddle? Where are you putting mock scrapes in a wooded terrain? continuous.
To echo off of what Grant was saying, why would you put something out in an area that you can't hunt? Like this, you're essentially putting out an attractant. So if you're in a wooded area, you automatically need to think about, okay, we've covered, we want a lot of deer to find it. So if you have a heavy pronounced trail, we have seen, and I guarantee you guys have too, scrapes develop right smack dab center in a deer trail, right? So don't be afraid that you can put it in a deer trail, but I would put it off of a deer trail, or if you have buck sign. So if now it's October 20th, you're thinking about creating a scrape maybe this time of year, you'll find rubs, you'll probably find scrapes. Don't be afraid to plop one right down where you think a deer is kind of carving out an area. If you've got some rubs or some scrapes in your woodlot, well, that's a great place for you to put something, because now you're an imposter that he doesn't know about. He hasn't seen, he hasn't smelt. Put it in a location that you either can monitor from your deer stand or you can kill from your deer stand. And that's a great location to put it. I think it's important, if you're in the woods, not to put it in too low lying of areas, as you have potential for it to get washed out. A lot of rain shed and watershed. You often have a lot of hillsides in wooded areas. Scrapes and deer prefer to work them on relatively flat ground. They don't want to be downhill working on a scrape. They don't want to be uphill working on a scrape. So find a bench, find a bottom or a ridge, and that's a good location for you to put it as well.
And we're big on hunting the wind, as I'm sure a lot of the people that are listening right now, that's one of the main factors that we take into consideration. When we call like Hail Mary time, what I would consider to be Hail Mary time is like the 12th through the beginning of first gun season in Illinois for us, which is like the third weekend in November, the third 4-day weekend, 3-day weekend in November. So that 12th to like 18th-ish time before gun season, which is Hail Mary time, we kind of tend to push the envelope like most people do. They don't have a buck down or anything like that. But I think one valuable piece of information that we've learned in terms of creating mock scrapes is if you can hang your tree high enough and make a buck to approach you, even if it's on the downwind side, if you are high enough and there's a topography change, for example, if you are on a ridge top and a buck circles below you, even if your wind's blowing right to him, it could blow right over the top of him. So we always take that into consideration. We had a good opportunity at a buck that I messed up last year in October that we did that exact same thing to. We hung, he came through our wind, but we were just high enough in elevation because he was coming so far beneath us because this bench rolls off and he was kind of approaching from the backside. So even though we were only about 12 to 15 feet up in our tree, we were probably 25 feet above him. And because he was so close coming down a fence row, it just blew right over the top of him. So I would take into consideration, where can you get away with hunting a wind, especially if you're, like field edge. It's pretty easy to hunt a wind on a field edge because okay, deer are going to be feeding out here. This wind is good, this wind is bad. But with a timber setup like an all wooded tract, like if you're an Ohio, Pennsylvania guy hunting a big wood public land piece, I would say to take into consideration like the elevation change and put yourself in a position where you can hunt a lot of different winds and it'll blow right over a deer's back, but that's on like the downwind side of, like Garrett said, a heavy pronounced trail.
If you guys put a mock scrape up, is it automatic you put a camera over it?
Oh, yeah.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole point, right? As soon as the scrape is created, you want to monitor it, to see if you are pissing off the deer that you think you are, or if it's a new farm, new area, you want to see what's in there. So to go off of that, I think it's important. We almost never put our camera on the scrape tree itself. And there's a couple different reasons why. First off, the branches are very low, so it's hard to really get those deer anyway. Secondly, when a deer is approaching the scrape, he's going to be staring right at that camera the whole time. So even if it's infrared or not, I mean, you just give him an opportunity to pick it. And then secondly, you don't, I think personally, get really the best angle for his personality, his posture, his mannerism. So we'll always be off to perpendicular to, shoot parallel down the row, if you will, about 7 yards, I'd say, with some type, either another tree or some type of stick and pick device to shoot, perpendicular to the scrape. So then you can see how he's approaching it, from which direction. You can see his mannerism, see his posture, and then you also cover a little more area as well.
Yeah, I think that's key. So I guess with that being said, I mean, I'm just thinking field edge scrapes, a lot of that, there's not a tree Like there's not like a hardwood tree right on the edge of the scrape. I'm just thinking of many of the farms I've hunted in the past. It's a lot of low overhanging branches. It's a scrape line along a field edge or whatever, and there's not necessarily in that scenario to hang a camera perpendicular because it's on an edge. So do you guys rely heavily on those stick and picks? And then have you guys seen where, they to a human they stick out like a sore thumb, and I'm sure obviously deer see them. Do you see any sort of hesitance towards those? Are you guys trying to help hide them at all with the stick and pick? Are you guys just plop them out there?
Yeah, I mean, we have been blatant with them, and yeah, to a human they're really obvious. But I think when a deer is coming to a scrape, like they're going with purpose, right? So if that's far enough away that they maybe don't hear a mechanism twerk or they don't see that flash, I mean, once they get to a scrape, they're distracted. Like he's now working it with his antlers and pawing at the dirt, and he's putting scent in it, and so he's occupied. As long as you don't have it just. I don't know. It is very obvious for us because it's 5 to 7 yards shooting, right down the fence row or cut cross from it. But we don't have very many deer that like just turn and look at it because they're going there with a purpose. Like they're focused on the scrape. You're not necessarily on the camera.
And we've had deer that'll come up and check it out because, any hunter's going to deposit a scent that they're like, even if they're the most scent-free cameras and they're sprayed down with field wipes and blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. Most hunters are going to deposit a foreign odor on their cameras, whether they store them in their garage or in their basement or whatever. They're going to pick up on the ambient odor from that house or wherever that was stored, and they're going to know something is different. But I don't believe that personally all the cameras that we have over scrapes are like a big deterrent. Just from what Garrett said, they're preoccupied.
Well, this time during that late October, November, you can get away with a lot more, I think, too.
Yeah.
Than even a late season. I feel there's so much more sensitive. So, I guess with this being said, you can get away with being a little more aggressive. Is what you're.
Yep.
But even in the early season, like right now, we have some cameras that are just blatant. So I don't think it. Just know the camera's purpose. If the camera is meant to be on a trail where it's just you're taking inventory, and this is a pronounced trail that's just been historically good for you to pick up deer on the past, then maybe you consider hiding that one a little bit more so that the deer's not like checking it out as they're going to and from. But like Garrett said, the purpose of those cameras is to monitor them when they're preoccupied with that scrape or they're pissed because they think somebody else is in there. And that's like the third, fourth, fifth thing that I would assume that a deer would be thinking about at that time.
I think that's all very helpful. And I think, do you guys think scrapes are, if you had 5 cameras to deploy, how many of those would go on a scrape in October, November?
This time here,
everyone
5.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I think it's important to illustrate how important it is, though, because you could say, I think mock scrapes are great, this, that, the other, but if you had 5 cameras and you put them all on mock scrapes, then that probably says this has been pretty effective in the past for you guys.
Oh yeah, I mean, we talked about this just the other day, Grant, where deer that daylight in November, I think you've got like a 3 to 5 day grace period. If like you get a picture of a deer in November daylighting, you can go in there and have a good opportunity to maybe see him again because he's probably frequenting in that area. But I think in October, and I mean all the way up until October, that deer will maybe daylight 1 or 2 days, like 1 or 2 days, the end. And when he does, you have to be there. So our success rate runs like our best opportunities to kill those deer in October are because of scrapes. So that's where they're going to be. And we're taking every single ounce of data that we can get from those cameras and apply it so that when we think he's going to daylight due to a weather factor, a change, something big, we want to be there when he does because he's going to do that maybe once, if you're super lucky, twice. But it's not going to be he's got him on daylight now on October 17th. He's going to be daylighting the rest of the year. No. Like, you got to be there when he daylights.
And for those of you guys that are listening to us right now thinking that we just have stands hung up with like 8 or 10 scrapes circling the perimeter of them, that's not it at all. Every stand that we hang is not based upon a scrape, but you can get so much valuable intel. Like a scrape is not necessarily like a let's hunt over this type of tool. It is a data gathering tool. If there's a deer that's very passive, doesn't like to rub his rack in there, and comes in there, doesn't work the ground, but just takes a pee, then that I would consider that to be a passive buck. But if there's a deer in there and he is going up on his back legs and he is thrashing the tree up higher than the licking branch that you even put on there, and he's peeing and he's visiting with regularity, we assume, at least on our end, that that's a dominant buck, which leads you to maybe not hunt over that scrape, but maybe say, I think I know where this deer is coming from. I'm going to go squeeze in tight on that. Now I'm going to rattle because this deer is what we believe to be an aggressive buck versus a passive buck. So they can give you so many pieces of intel, just like where they're coming from, where they're going. Just a couple weeks ago, we had 3 pictures on 3 separate different cameras of a deer. And so right now, Garrett and I are currently trying to figure out, is our number 1 hit lister this year. We call him Robert. And he's a deer that we passed last year as a 4-year-old. He's 5 this year. Really, really nice. And we got him on 3 cameras, and he came on the same night and hit all 3 of those cameras. So we're trying to theorize, like, okay, what was the wind doing on that night? He got to the final scrape. He came through a gate hole, picked him up on camera. Went through this bottom, picked him up on camera. Got him on a scrape at the end of that line, and that was the last picture of those runs in chronological time-stamped order. So what was he doing that brought him from X to Y in terms of the weather conditions that particular day? And we're trying to figure that out so that we can kill him on his travel route.
No, that a lot of great stuff. I mean, to break down in that. I mean, in terms of just squeezing those videos, especially too on mock scrapes, for every piece of data in terms of how aggressive he is, how passive he is, and what you need to do. I think there's a lot that goes into that, and success of making it happen in the moment of truth. I mean, even with Lucky, for example, if you would have not known that he was aggressive like that,
we wouldn't have
probably would you have rattled right there in the
No.
morning first thing, and he would have came right in. I mean, that's where the video has killed a lot of deer. The deer I killed last year, there was a lot of mature bucks on this farm, and he came in and tucked his tail and hit a scrape in like January, like very nervous.
Oh yeah.
And then so I saw him that morning. It was November 3rd, and similar scent cone. It was shooting over a cliff, and I knew that from the year prior. And I mean, he was old and hobbled at this point. And I had the extinguisher, instead of hitting like a loud grunt, I put it to a fawn bleat. This is the lightest little thing.
Yep.
And he came back and checked it out, and I killed him then. So like that video was the key. Anyone else is like, oh, big old deer.
Yeah.
Just roar at it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, that is key to run video on for those examples right there.
You can learn about the personality of your deer. We've had deer that are so big that have never fought ever, not one single time. But we have a particular deer. We've been trying to kill his ass for 6 years, and we had a couple opportunities, but he's about 115-inch 8-pointer, and he's older than the dirt.
Well, EHD got his
EHD got him last year, but yeah, but his body language, like he wanted to fight every single 3-year-old from the time he was 3 till like 6. He was bristled up every time he entered a food plot. He didn't like other deer. He wasn't socially accepting of like other deer whatsoever. And there's so many things you can learn by putting your cameras on video mode that's invaluable. And I think the goal of our series, the image autopsy that we talked about on our YouTube channel there, was saying, I think the number one mistake that whitetail hunters make that are big trail camera users are, I got a big buck on camera. All right, now what? How do you go about that and kill him? Well, if you can learn him by putting it on video mode, if you can pattern him, if you can note which way he's coming in on a certain wind, the time. Like, we take time stamps into serious consideration. If there's a deer hitting our scrapes or something like that within an hour of dusk and dawn, then we are assuming that he's living on us. If he's visiting that quickly after dark.
One question as well before we kind of wrap this up is... Sure. Are you seeing? A lot of the people we've talked to is the annual data. Are you guys seeing bucks showing up on some of these mock scrapes the same time every year? They may be there for kind of like that 5-day period you mention of, or not so much.
Yes. We analyze annual data not as finitely as the day, but we do lump it into like a week, if you will. I think that's the best way to look at it. And yeah, you will see consistency, especially when you take annual data into consideration a little bit further, not just necessarily that exact spot and exact time, exact day, but like, okay, this deer used this area this time of the year last year or the year before that, or et cetera. So there's a broad spectrum of annual data you can calculate. And I've shifted my mindset on this. Like, beforehand, I considered annual data to be like a guy said, well, this deer came through on November 9th at 8 a.m. I need to be here November 9th at 8 a.m. I'm not sure if it's that acute, but I do think like, okay, this buck was here last year, in the 9th in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So now you can understand that, okay, I need to probably be here.
Between the 8th and the 10th.
Yeah. And hunt it in the morning. That's where I think we can run it. And with scrapes, we do see the same thing. Just like with Lucky, we had him in that same scrape, in that same area, that same time sequence of days when he was 4 and did it when he was 5.
So with that being said, right now as you're listening to this, calculate and store your scrape content with precision of, I want to kill that deer next year, because it could be the difference. I mean, everyone forgets so much, and everyone's like, oh, I'll remember that. No, you won't. Write it down, store it, organize it.
And there's it's so easy now when you take your computer and you like throw all those pictures and videos of your deer into your deer folder. Like you can literally click a button and it'll separate it from like date stamp.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not any easier than that. I mean, start there and then start chunking it down.
Absolutely. Well, we certainly appreciate you guys recording a few episodes with us. I know I enjoyed it, and I'm sure everyone else has as well. And I'll kind of give you guys a 20-second plug time here. Clock's ticking. Go.
Hit us up on YouTube. Moultrie's Image Autopsy, that's one of our partners, and we use a trail camera data, and we break down everything. Every lesson we've learned for like 13 bucks out of like the 40 that the 5 or 6 of us have killed over the last 6 or 7 years that we have extensive trail camera data with. Something as simple as don't get fooled by a deer size. That's a great lesson that we learned. Deer can follow a general pattern, or they can follow a very cute pattern. That's what we've learned. Certain deer will carve out certain areas, and even if you're hunting a small tract of land like an 80, 50, 40, 30 acres, you can still kill a big buck that's living or around that acreage if you're smart about the way that you hunt them. So we break down all those lessons. So that's on our YouTube channel, and we'd really appreciate if you guys went and subscribed to our YouTube channel, because we think it's awesome, and we've killed a lot of pretty good deer. And then the last thing, I listened to that podcast with Greg Litzinger about reading rubs.
Yeah.
Same thing with scrapes. I think perennial scrapes definitely exist. There are certain scrapes that Garrett and I know every single year are going to be hot. So, man, it's getting to be about that time. Go to a spot where you've historically got really good scrape data and plant yourself for a few days, and I think you're going to come up with an opportunity.
For sure. Great tip. All right. Good luck, guys.
See you.